Namaskar. Welcome to this new session. Uh, we are trying to understand the Patanjali's text as a text on darshana. And we considered very basic and primary information about the structure of Darshana Shastra on certain columns, such as Epistemology, Psychology, Teleology, Cosmology, Ontology, Ethico-religious system, Theology, Intuitive, Mysticism. So when it comes to the realm of essential knowledge, this will never come by cerebral process, temporal process, empirical process. That knowledge is okay for the empirical knowledge which comes through the senses. Human being is endowed with enormous consciousness, and then it is assisted by several organs of mind, such as there are cognitive organs, there is mental organ, there is intellectual organ, there is emotional organ, there is sentimental organ, there is memory organ, there is creative organ, there is imagination organ. So, these are various facets of human psyche. And apart from that, we are endowed with intuitive organ. This intuitive process doesn't need perception, cognition, inference, testimony, imagination, intellection, analysis, intellectual processes, analytical processes. All these are not needed. Logical processes, not necessary. It is something, a spontaneous kind of spark which comes from within. And that is why it is called intuition. We are taught from within. We are given a kind of what is called as pratibha. So it is a tuition from within. There is a tutor from within, and there is a tuition within. That's why perhaps the word is intuition. Intuition. And this intuition depends upon the caliber of mind stuff, caliber of consciousness. Through yoga, we can evolve the caliber of this consciousness, caliber of the psyche, caliber of the mind stuff. And when we evolve it, then it can become capable of actualizing the samadhi process. And then by samadhi process, one will get the knowledge, perception, cognition, transformation, which is unique realm. And in the realm of metaphysics, we need to develop this kind of intuitive scope. Today we know in the realm of biology, there is something called as microbiology. Then in chemistry, physics, we have something called as microscopes, because we want to sight something which is very subtle and naked eyes cannot be having vision of it. So when it comes from under a microscope, the eyes can see it. So that's a microscope to eyes. Then in the realm of subtle, the human intelligence can take a leap. So also, with regards to something very, very remote, distant objects, we have telescopes. Naked eyes will never show what the telescope will show. So we have microscopes, electron microscopes to dwell in the realm of subtle. And then we have telescopes, radio telescopes, Hubble telescopes to dwell into the realm of remote. So we are aware of something from electron microscope to Hubble telescope. Similarly, there is intutivo-scope, if I may say so. The samadhi pragna gives those certain visions intuitively. So yoga provides, or rather constitutes or assembles, intuitive scope for a yogi. That's why yogi's realm of knowledge is totally different. The radius of knowledge is totally different. What a common man will not be able to imagine, even the yogi can divulge, perceive, not only go for perceptions and cognitions, but can go for transformations as well. So that's the intutivo-scope, if I may say so, which samadhi provides. And for that to be assembled, intutivo-scope to be assembled, there are certain practices where basically the mind has to be purified, mind has to be upgraded, mind has to be evolved. And then intutivo-scope can be really assembled, which yoga does. When yoga does, how does it do? It is by a scheme which is given by Yoga Darshan and Yoga Shastra, that is called Ethico-religious system. In simple words for you to understand, the Ashtanga Yoga. The Ashtanga Yoga evolving as per the evolved calibration of the chitta, and then evolving into kriya yoga, which is a middle hierarchy yogi, and then evolving into samadhi yoga of the first chapter. So there are intuitive mystic processes in yoga, as a matter of fact, to be realizing ultimate realities. Without intuitive mysticism, we really cannot have any knowledge in the realm of metaphysics. So these are the columns. So in epistemology, knower, knowable, knowing, and knowledge are all investigated, scrutinized, set right, and improved. So the Indian philosophers call it prama, prameya, pramana, and pramatru. The Tarka Shastra has definitions of all these. So some philosophies go in detail about the Knowables. What are the Knowables? Classify the Knowables, which the Vaisheshika does. Sankhya does to some extent. Vedanta also does to some extent. Some darshanas specialize in the process of very knowing. The Nyaya Shastra does it. Yoga Shastra does it. Vedanta Shastra also does it. So all the Shastras have to do all these delineations, analysis, investigations, and scrutiny, and the culturing and shaping, etc. So, prama is the knowledge, or the mental state to give the knowledge, the mental modification to give the knowledge. So, prama, prameya, the knowable, investigating the object, like it happens in the realm of the science today, modern science. It investigates every knowable thing, characterize the knowable things, understand the properties of knowable things, the characteristics of knowable things, the source of knowable things, the function of knowable things. So that's what the physical sciences do it. Then there is investigation of knowing process. How does the knowing take place? We need the senses, we need the mind behind it, we need the processes of intelligence, logic, memory, then the perception and inference and testimony, etc. So there are instruments of knowledge. These instruments of knowledge are dealt with quite thoroughly in all the philosophical systems and quite prominently in Nyaya Shastra, in Nyaya Darshana. So prama, prameya, knowables, pramana. And that's why Nyaya Shastra is called Pramana Shastra. And every philosophical system must have its Pramana Shastra. Then prama through, the knower. And yoga exalts in identifying the subjective entity, which is the locus of knowledge, which gets the knowledge, which is the receiver of knowledge, which is the processor of knowledge, or which is the attainer of the knowledge. Knowledge comes to whom? It comes to subjective entity. You don't say this is the knowledge of my eyes and this is my knowledge of the ears. This is knowledge of my tongue. This is knowledge of my nose. Or this is knowledge of my skin. You say it is my knowledge. The subjective entity. So that pramatru is investigated thoroughly. And Patanjali's yoga does this in very, very big way. So much so that all other philosophies are depending on yoga to understand real knower. Vedanta also does to some extent. But yoga does to set right that knower entity. Facilitate the knower entity to have genuine knowledge, authentic knowledge, proper knowledge, samyak knowledge, faultless knowledge, all-dimensional knowledge, etc. Multi-dimensional, dimensional and omnidimensional knowledge. The knower. So it will be more interesting for you to have a thought process on prama, the gnosis on which the knowledge is based. Prama, pramana, prameya, pramatru. So that's the investigation of all the four entities in pramana mimamsa or epistemology of Patanjali. And then the mind is so important behind knowledge. The knowledge depends upon state of mind. The knowledge impacts the state of mind. The knowledge influences the state of mind. So state of mind contributes in both the directions. To formulate the knowledge, to crystallize the knowledge, and then having crystallized the knowledge again, the mind is influenced by that. So mind is benefactor of knowledge process, and the mind is beneficiary too of knowledge process. So the mind is so important aspect, precisely mind stuff, more precisely chitta, or very psyche. And therefore psychological investigations, psychological observations, psychological studies are so important in Darshan Shastra. So that's why that was the third column. And rather the second column. Then to understand the entity of the knowable, go back to the source of the knowable entities, to the primary cause, primordial cause, primeval cause. So that is ontology. Similarly, about the knower entity, go to the original state of the knower. That is again ontology. Then all these knowables and the knower have come through the process of cosmological unfoldment. We are all part of this creation. It is not that the creation is something apart from us and we are totally different than creation. We are part of creation. We have come from creation. And therefore, the creation process has to be understood. How is the creation? Why is the creation? From where is the creation? For what is the creation? So how, what, why, etc. about creation is investigated. That's cosmology. The purpose of creation, the teleology. So ontology, teleology, cosmology, I briefly explained all those things. And to have this knowledge process, realization process perfected, or at least qualified and capacitated and empowered, there is ethico-religious practices. You must embrace certain practices, then only knowledge will come. It's not a cerebral process of knowledge where just thought process, thinking, etc. So we have to see that we use the coordination of all these organs, cognitive organs, sensitivity organs, perceptive organs, thought organ, imagination organ, memory organ, retention organ, the crystallization organ, imagination organ, extrapolation organ. All these organs have to be developed by integral practices. So that is the Ashtanga Yoga process. That's why Patanjali says Ashuddhikshaya and Jnana Prapti are two effects of Ashtanga Yoga. So those are sets of practices called ethico-religious practices. Unless we embrace to these practices, we will not set right the knower, we will not set right the knowing, we will not set right the knowledge. And if the knowable is internal, subjective, we will not set right the knowable also. If it is external knowable, it's a different thing. But if it says subjective knowable, knowing one's own mind, knowing one's own intelligence, knowing one's own memory, these are all subjective knowables. In that case, we need to set right those objects as well. So that is ethico-religious system. And then the part of the ethico-religious system, it culminates into what is called as intuitive mysticism, intuitive mystic practices, which are samadhi processes. No real knowledge, essential knowledge will come without samadhi. Be that the philosophy of Nyaya or Vaisheshika or Sankhya or Vedanta, other systems than yoga, or even heterodox systems such as Jain and Buddha, they all have come to what is called as consensus that without samadhi process, essential knowledge, samyak knowledge doesn't come. So those are the columns. So I think I will be ending the delineation on these columns at this point in time. The whole structure will be unraveled to you when we go through the text of Patanjali, where we are going to take a bird's eye view of Patanjali's text, and we will identify what column is where, what is the function of each column, how the column is raised up, and how the column is functioning. But before going to that, I think I need to tell you a little bit about Patanjali. We had an invocation right at the beginning of the session. Invocation to Patanjali. Patanjali was considered as a sage, is considered as a sage. Patanjali Mahamunaye Namaha. Mahamuni. But Patanjali was Adishesha avatar. Rather, Patanjali is Adishesha avatar, because he is a Nityasuri. Being Adishesha, he is Nityasuri. There is nothing like was. There is nothing like was for someone like Patanjali. Patanjali is an eternal being as Adishesha. For us, he is a historical figure. Some deduce that Patanjali was in 200 BC, etc., etc., which is not really sound. Patanjali is actually eternal, being Adishesha. So Patanjali as author of Yoga Sutras could be one time. Patanjali as author of Vyakarana Shastra could be another time. Patanjali as author of text on Ayurveda could be on another time. But then we think Patanjali as a man must be in one era. While we as students of philosophy and yoga should know that we have been incarnating so very often, constantly under some incarnation or the other. So Patanjali could be incarnation. In one incarnation did one thing, another incarnation did another thing, another incarnation did another thing. So if you think that Panini time Patanjali was only one Patanjali and he did all his works there during that time, and then if you have some basis to arrive at Panini time Patanjali, which might be 200 BC, it doesn't mean that he did the Yoga Sutra work during the same time. He is an eternal person. He is an eternal being a Nitya Suri of Vaikuntha as Adishesha. And that's why the description of Patanjali in that invocation said, Patanjali did work on yoga for chitta purification, did work on Vyakarana for vacha purification, and did work on Ayurveda for body purification. Kaya, Vacha, Manasa. It's a very important triad in Adhyatma. The whole Adhyatmic and spiritual process is woven by Kaya, Vacha, Manasa. Kaya, Vacha, Manas are three instruments through which one evolves that spiritual life. And therefore Patanjali contributed in every realm. Something for Kaya, something for Vacha, something for Manas. Then Patanjali is described there as a being up to the waist, up to the where arms reach, abahu purushakaram. So he is in human form up to where your hands reach. And thereafter, he is in snake form. And being in human form, he is wielding Shankha, Chakra, Asi. The disc, the conch, and the sword. As Adi Shesha Avatar, he is wielding those things. So the description says he is Adi Shesha, primordial snake, Ananta, the snake on which Lord Vishnu reposes. That is his bed. So Patanjali is Adi Shesha Avatara precisely. So he did the work on yoga, Vyakarana, Yoga Sutra, Vyakarana Mahabhashya, and as the tradition believes, he penned down Charaka Samhita. So it is important to know how these subjects are interrelated. For us, those who practice yoga, Patanjali is known for his work in yoga. Then we think Vyakarana is secondary, while the Vyakarana people think that is the primary thing and other things are secondary. While in Ayurveda, they think Charaka is such a prominent figure in Ayurveda. So that was primary work and other works were secondary. So these are all perspectives. These are all different dimensions. Anyway, Patanjali is more known because of yoga today, because yoga is now gone to nook and corner of the world. And therefore Patanjali is known for yoga, and that it is understood. He did also something in Ayurveda, did something in Vyakarana as well. But for Chitta Vritti, it is so important, because can you imagine a Chitta Vritti without language, without words, without linguistic components, language components? How much is your thought process bereft of any language? So it takes recourse to some language. The thought process always is with a language, over a language, with a very material of language and language components, linguistic components. So therefore, we can understand how much the Vyakarana Shastra or the linguistics, language aspects, language components are so closely related to Chitta Vritti. You really cannot separate them. They are inseparably one. The thought, which is always in a language, most of the thoughts are in language. There might be few thoughts without language. Like subhumans have thought process, there is no language for them. Infants have thought, no language for them. But most of the thoughts are with linguistic material. Therefore, it was important, the relationship between the language, linguistic components, which is the function of the oral organ, and Chitta Vritti is so closely connected. So also the Chitta depends upon dhatus, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Any imbalance in the dhatus doesn't only create disease for body, but also disturbance in the mind. So the Chitta is also dependent on dhatu, dhatu samya avastha. For a good Chitta, there must be dhatu samya avastha. For disturbed Chitta, there will be dhatu vaishamya avastha. Disparity in dhatus, the keels of our body. So therefore, dhatu management of Vata, Pitta, Kapha the management of the saptadhatus of the body, tridhatus as well, is so important. And therefore Ayurveda is also closely related because it deals with dhatus, tridhatus, saptadhatus. It's not only remedial science that it gives remedies to diseases. Ayurveda has its own philosophy, and it is very close to Sankhya philosophy, Prakriti, the word for even our health. So, Ayurveda is closely related. It is not one of the pathies in the world that we have today, like allopathy and etc. other pathies. It has a deeper kind of perception of the body related to mind. Mind as integral to body, body as integral to mind. So therefore, he did work in all the three realms. They are interrelated. Then we will have to also consider another thing about Patanjali. This question perhaps did not occur to anyone so far, except few isolated ones who are more concerned about very tradition, the legacy. Who might be Patanjali's guru? Who taught Patanjali? Patanjali was only expounder of yoga shastra, in the sense yoga darshana. He was not propounder. He was not propounder of yoga, he was expounder of yoga. So there is something called yoga prior to Patanjali. Yoga has been there even prior to Patanjali. Where did Patanjali get this insight into yoga? For which we will have to look into Agama Shastras. Origin of yoga is not from Patanjali. Mahabharata has a statement here. Hiranyagarbha yogasya vakta nanyah puratanaha. Yoga was first mentioned by an entity called Hiranyagarbha, and no one else is precisely the statement in Mahabharata. Hiranyagarbha yogasya vakta nanyah puratanaha. And that too very puratana, timeless beginning. Yoga was there. Now who is this Hiranyagarbha? Mahabharata itself sets answering it. This Hiranyagarbha, because Hiranyagarbha name comes to the four-faced Brahma, he is also called Hiranyagarbha. The sun in the sky is also called Hiranyagarbha. And therefore Mahabharata clarifies, who is this Hiranyagarbha? The Hiranyagarbha is the one who is praised as supreme being, the first being, the timeless being, beginningless being, the presiding being on the entire creation. Hiranyagarbha samavartata agre bhutasya jata patireka asit. He is Pati. He is the master of all bhutas, all the living, non-living creation. He is the master of all those. Samavartatagre. He is at the beginning of all creations. Creations are in several cycles. Creation is an eternal process, beginningless process. In one of the talks I told you, this creation is not 16 billion light years, as modern science believes, because Big Bang is said to have taken place 16 billion years ago. And before that, that means there was no creation. That is not true. There have been creations. Sarga and pralaya, sarga, pralaya is a cycle. It's a cyclic process. The creation and dissolution, creation and dissolution, creation and dissolution. During Brahma's day, there is creation. During Brahma's night, there is dissolution. So we have seen this in one of the earlier sessions. Brahma's day spans 4,320 million years daytime and 4,320 million years night time. So during daytime there is creation, during night time there is dissolution. So like day and night cycle, there's a day and night of Brahma. And therefore his 124 hours of Brahma spans to 8,640 million years, 8.64 billion years. So half of it is day, half of it is night. During the first one half, there is a day and there is creation. During the other half, there is dissolution. So it's a constant process, creation and dissolution. So one who is at the very beginning of all creations, and also, according to their testimonies, when entire creation ultimately goes to noumenal, it is said to be going into the belly of the Creator. One of the sages, Markandeya, was blessed to be seeing the whole, the condition of the universe during dissolution. Bala Mukunda form, he could see. The whole thing was in his belly. And then, of course, creation comes from his belly, which is symbolically described as Brahma comes from navel of Narayana, and then from Brahma, four-faced deity, comes the whole creation. So he comes from navel. Padmanabha, therefore, is the name, one of the names of Narayana. Similarly, one of the names of Narayana is Hiranyagarbha. He is the one who was the first one to give discourse on yoga. That means in every creation, he does this. In every creation, he gives certain wisdom. He gives certain texts. And Vaishnavagam say that is called Pancharatra. Pancharatra Agama. So in Pancharatra Agama, you get mention of yoga. So Patanjali, as Adishesha, would be hearing to this discourse every time when Sriman Narayana would be given discourse in Vaikuntham, Sri Vaikuntham, which is recorded as Pancharatra Agama. So, Sriman Narayana, Paravasudeva in Sri Vaikuntham was the one from whom Patanjali as Adishesha got yoga. Nobody really investigated into in our times. Of course, this investigation was there in classical times, and in classical times people knew the source of yoga. Today people think yoga has come from Patanjali. No, Patanjali has given us yoga. Patanjali has given us yoga. Yoga has not come from Patanjali. But yoga has come to Patanjali from Paravasudeva, Adi Narayana in Sri Vaikuntham. Because in Sri Vaikuntham there are Nitya Suris, eternal beings. So Patanjali as Adishesha is one of the Nitya Suris. So this also comes in Purusha Sukta mentioned here, that the Nitya Suris are always citing Paravasudeva Narayana. That is his para form. There are 5 forms of Vasudeva, or the Para Vasudeva, or Narayana in Vaikuntha. Para, Vyuha, Vibhava, Archa, Antaryami. So he is in 5 forms. One and the same Paramatma, one and the same Paravasudeva is in 5 forms. Para, Vyuha, Vibhava, Archa, Antaryami. This is postulation of Pancharatra. So Patanjali as Adishesha is ever in Vaikuntha. He is ever with Narayana. Whenever Narayana wants to have repose, he takes repose on Adishesha. That means the wisdom of Narayana must have seeped into the bed. And the bed is Adishesha. So the source of Patanjali Yoga is in Pancharatra. And certain things are still available, they are recorded in one of the Samhitas of Pancharatra. Ayurveda Samhita records the yoga which was divulged in Vaikuntham, Sri Vaikuntham. So that is available even today in one of the Samhitas of Pancharatra called Ayurveda Samhita. And there you will see that many parallels between Patanjali's text and Pancharatra described yoga. Pancharatra, there are 2 yogas mentioned. One was yoga of the nature of karma yoga, because karma yoga is also known as yoga. In Bhagavad Gita, so many places word yoga comes. Most often it comes for karma yoga. We have misplaced the definition of Bhagavad Gita. Yoga karmasu koshalam. We think yoga means this yoga that we are talking about. No, it is not this yoga, it is karma yoga. So yoga word in Bhagavad Gita comes more often for yoga, which is karma yoga. So briefly it is called yoga. So that was one yoga instructed, which is also, there is a corroboration to it in Bhagavad Gita when Krishna says in the 4th chapter, I instructed this yoga to Vivasvana, then it was passed on to Manu, Ikshvaku. So that's how the karma yoga was transmitted. But the first time it was mentioned to Vivasvan, that is the very sun, the deity sun, who is again Nitya Suri. And the other yoga is Chitta Nirodhakhya Yoga. The yoga in the form of restraint of Chitta is another kind of yoga. So 2 yogas were instructed in Sri Vaikuntham. One is Karma Yoga, the other one is Chitta Nirodhakhya Yoga. That is Patanjali's yoga. So source of Patanjali's yoga. Where did Patanjali learn his yoga? He learnt it in Sri Vaikuntham. From whom? Under whom? None other than Sriman Narayana, Adi Narayana, Paravasudeva. So as students of yoga, we need to know this as well, that Patanjali's yoga has source there, which Mahabharata testifies. And Ayurveda Samhita is a testimony to it, because some remnants of those yoga are preserved in Pancharatra, Ayurveda Samhita. And if you look into it, there are lots of parallels. Ishvara, concept of Ishvara, Abhyasa Vairagya, Ashtanga Yoga. These mentions have come there. So Patanjali has only expounded on yoga, not propounded yoga. This must be engraved in your mind. And we can also go to source of yoga. The yoga which was instruction to Patanjali himself. We are fortunate enough to look into it by going into Pancharatra Agama, Ahirbudnya Samhita. So, this is also what I wanted to relate to you about Patanjali as Adishesha and how did he get yoga as Adishesha. He got it in Sri Vaikuntham, and source of yoga is from Narayana, in Narayana, Adi Narayana, Sriman Narayana is the source of yoga. So, this is what I wanted to give as a prologue to our having overview of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So here ends the prologue. And now we are going to proceed to have a bird's eye view of Patanjali Yoga Sutra, so that with this education we will not be misled about what really yoga is and what is the whole diameter of yoga, the radius of yoga, how much radius Patanjali yoga has, rather than the yoga that we have in modern times. And we accord parentage to Patanjali. We say every school says this is Patanjali's yoga. So for once we will get to know what is in Patanjali's yoga, so that will be a strong kind of lighthouse when we move in the field of yoga, in our pursuit of yoga. Like in ocean, you require lighthouse. So, having an overview of Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Patanjali Yoga Darshana, it is so important. It is Darshana Shastra, as I have told you. So, this will serve as a lighthouse when we delve into the whole ocean of yoga, so that we will not be misled. Because we are prone to be misled in modern world. So many kinds of yoga are on surface, are being catered. And everyone claims that theirs is genuine yoga, theirs is authentic yoga. So let's try to have some kind of insight into what is essentially Patanjali yoga. What all does it circumscribe? What is the subject matter of Patanjali yoga? And then we will see what is our idea of Patanjali yoga. Then we will be able to reform it. So with that, the today's session ends. Namaskar all of you.